Okay, early stages, you'll get the slides, PowerPoint slides, and you'll get the recording after the session. Arizona, Amy, great stuff. So don't worry about that. If you, you'll get the PowerPoint slides so you can use them as you see fit. Just please, if you use them in any of your presentations, just reference where you got them from. I would greatly appreciate that. So Agile primer, and it's really intro to Agile. You know, we can talk about Agile in other areas. We're going to start off with the challenge. You know, what really is driving Agile and what continues to drive it. From there, we'll talk about the basics, tie-in mindset and culture, get into some of the core practices. We'll get back to value. I'll talk about some risks. And throughout the session, I love questions. I got chat wide open here. Please don't hesitate to share your questions, your thoughts on this topic. Also, you know, if you have additional information you want to share with the group. Oh man, I just read some great article about business analysts and Agile. If you want to share that in the chat, that would be great. If you have some dissenting thoughts that you want to share, put that in the chat. I just ask for things to be respectfully done. Other than that, that's part of learning, is debating back and forth some of the comments and some of the things we're thinking about. So that's the setup. So let's get into our challenge. So what is our challenge? What's going on? Defining our challenge. So the biggest issue that we face, and you can look at the slides here, is that we have to build something, whether it's software, whether it's a construction project, whether it's a renovation, whether it's a new HR policy. We basically are looking at building something that doesn't exist. Even if you're doing an add-on to something, it's still what you're adding on doesn't exist. And your clients, your customers, whether internal or external customers, it's tough for them to visualize that. It's really hard to see. We are, you know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. You know, a piece of working something, some type of demo, you know, can be upwards of worth 1,000,000 words. There are some researchers that say a 1-minute video is worth like a 1,000,000 words. So this idea of being able to show something becomes very important. And then show it and give opportunities to show it more and more and more during the course of the engagement, so that you can deal with disruption and change during the time the project is running. Again, whether it's a construction project, whether it's a project to deploy a new benefits program, whether it's, you know, a construction project, the whole concept here is visualize soon, allow for input during the course of the project so that you keep the engagement going with your customer, your client, whether internal or external, through the whole course of the engagement. And the concept here is you do that because things change during the time of that engagement. And we have a very difficult time visualizing, writing down what we're thinking and try to connect it into something that's going to become tangible. Code is tangible. It produces a GUI interface that you interact with. So the more they can see what they're interacting with, the better. That's why you're hearing more people working on prototypes. You hear more people working on wireframes as it relates to web projects, more conversations around personas so they can understand better, you know, who's going to be looking at it and make adjustments accordingly. But ultimately, the thing that really drove Agile, ultimately, in the project world, doesn't matter software, any project world, you got to manage a schedule. So you have delivery times, you got to watch out for date slips, you got to watch out for milestones, and you can manage that. It's a technical thing. You can manage that. Then you got to deal with scope. You know, do we have what we originally thought we were going to do? Are we delivering it without any issues? And also, what did we do if, you know, how do we handle our change orders? So we controlled our budget, didn't spend what was originally thought of. We spent that amount. We didn't really jump after any extra resources. So, man, we hit the triple constraint, rock and roll. We hit our schedule, we hit our scope, we hit our budget. But you think you're supposed to have a happy customer, right? Well, why don't you? Well, what we're seeing now, 2 wells in a row, that means it's important. What we're seeing now is this triple constraint, schedule, scope, and budget is not an iron triangle. It should be a flexible fiberglass triangle with the word need on top of it. You work in an agile environment because you want to focus on delivering need. You know, Sonia, business analyst's job is to figure out what the need is. So in a typical waterfall or structured project, the business analyst operates up front to gather as much information about the need as possible. You're still doing what they call that Scrum Zero as a business analyst, but during the course of the project, business analysts are supporting and looking for those emergent requirements that will help drive increased delivery of value. Because what we want is we want to deliver an outcome, not an output. An outcome is something that delivers value. Output is here, I did this. The different mindset. And so ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out how to deal with the requirements that are pounding at us and the technology options that are pounding at us. Right now, we live in a house of pain. This is called the Stacy Matrix. And this house of pain is that our work is both complex and our work is complicated. So because of all these options, there's less certainty about what technology to use. There's a ton of people asking for things. We don't know exactly what we want. We got to find something that allows for much more flexibility during the course of the project. And I didn't say speed. Agile is not about speed. You can increase your speed to delivery over time, but you go to Agile for value outcomes, not speed. That's very important. So any questions there, let me know in chat. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to solve the outcome issue. When we work on something, we want to make sure we deliver the outcome that produces the most value. If something is complex and complicated, it's hard to understand value during the course of the project. And that's why the waterfall method can be challenging unless you use some hybrid agile practices within it. If it's not complicated, or if it's complicated and not complex, you can use a waterfall project. You have to have some stability. In most cases now, we don't live with much stability, so we need something that could be more flexible. And guess what? It's not just you, it's not just the methodology that needs to be more flexible. It's the practitioners within the methodology that need to be more practical. I do a whole presentation that just goes into the idea of working in an agile culture. So what are the mindset shifts and the way we work that are different in agile? This presentation covers that a bit, but it goes into some of the practices. But I always like to talk about the fact that the practices are not valuable unless the mindset and the belief is there. So there is a different mindset. Historically, we operate this project way. It's a great way to operate. We have gates, we have processes, we have flows. And during each step, things are occurring, and you're locking in, you're locking in on your scope and your budget early in the stage and blocking any change so you can deliver on time, on budget, on scope. So there's a blackout period here. And the longer that blackout period, the more challenging. So Jonathan, you wrote really great comments here. I spent SDLC working waterfall methodology. We have done prototyping to help clarify what our customers want. They want to talk, yeah, absolutely. You want some big picture items, Jonathan. Great feedback. Great way of sharing that, what's going on as people get too deep into the practices. There's some challenges there, and we almost start mimicking some of the same things we do or have done in waterfall because we want some more structure. but structure and value output and disruption, they don't work together. It's just something you can't do. So this is a plan-driven way of operating. I can set the plan up and then we just execute on the plan. So it's not about as much about thinking and creating. Once you engage the project, it's about doing and doing at an exceptional level based on the plan. But this is software, but any project is complex and complicated. So in that, where is our approach to be able to find and discover? Find and discover. So when you work in Agile, you're working on an adaptive method. You're finding and discovering. And Sony, one of the things that business analysts think about in Agile is the idea of an emergent requirement. This emergent requirement is really the most valuable output of Agile. And that is, as you do these cycles, what are you learning as your people are touching your what's set to deliver, what that sliver of functionality is. And then what input you're getting and what have you found that needs to change. You found that it's such amount of value that you have to go back and redo even the cycle, the time box that you worked in initially. So now what you're hearing is a lot of negotiation, because in part of Agile, as you start working on it, it's this idea of value. Remember, I talked about outcome, value. So as you're getting an emergent requirement in this adaptive way of working, all right, you find this, how do you value it? How do you evaluate its value? And these are some of the complicated questions that you run into with Agile. We're certainly not going to solve that in this presentation today, but what you want to see is you're really looking at a world of a plan, and you drive through the plan, or an understanding of a practice, and you adapt and adjust to deliver. But your goal is to deliver based on what you believe is the most valuable outcome. So that's an important observation. Very simple, but some folks get confused by it. So what is Agile? So this is I want you to think about now. It's very simple. Agile itself is a way of working. It is an open source way of working, meaning there are core values and core principles, but that you can build practices, you can build frameworks off of those, as long as they go back to the core values and the core principles. So when we talk about Scrum, Scrum is a productized version of Agile for running software projects. When we talk about scaled Agile or disciplined Agile or SAFe, we're talking about Agile for large enterprise-wide management of a project. When we talk about Lean, it's a way of evaluating the work that you're doing to decide whether it's valuable or not. So there's a bunch of practices that are developed in these. What happens to people is they get lost in the practices. They say they're Agile because they do a retrospective. A retrospective is a great practice, but what is the reason from a value standpoint that someone in Agile does a retrospective? It's because they want to continuously learn. That's the value that drives to that retrospective. So basically, Agile is an open source way of working that has multiple flavors, packaged ways of operating based on those values and principles, and each flavor has different practices. And Scrum is a way of doing Agile for software projects. It could also be used for marketing projects. It could also be used for HR projects. It is a time-boxed working methodology that allows for visibility over certain iterations of time to readjust and rework. And Scrum is what most of us see as Agile right now. But when you think about Scrum is the actualization of the work that you're doing. So it's the production of the work. that Scrum looks at. So why are we doing Agile? And this concept of a trimming at the tails. So when you go back to waterfall, go back a few slides here. Sorry if it's slow. You go on that left side. In order to block out the world during your production, your plan has to be tight, concise, not. Your plan has to include everything you can consider as a possibility during that blackout period. In most cases, the way waterfall is set up is there's a lot of risk mitigation. So there's a lot of extra work that ultimately isn't needed. So when when Agile is done right, you don't have to deliver so much. You can trim the tail of the work. You can realize that some of the work that you're doing is not going to deliver value, so you don't have to do it because you were able to plan accordingly and pivot and adjust. Just think of it as the idea of, ultimately, how much do I pack versus, hey, I'm gonna have money to buy things at certain times during my trip. So instead of filling a big luggage thing, I'm going to go and I'm going to buy certain clothes based on where I'm at. Maybe you give those clothes away at the end, or maybe you include those clothes in your closet going forward. It's not the perfect model because there's a lot of extra costs in the model I was just talking about, but you definitely reduce how much you would how much you actually end up doing in regard to clothes compared to what you try to plan for. We see that a lot. So it's trimming the tail concept, which is we want to cut back on the amount of work we do because we can see now that work isn't going to provide value. And that's one of the ways that you can save time and save money in Agile. You can do that because you don't have to put all the planning into all the possible repercussions or situations going on and then execute on that in your blackout period. So now we're going to go to mindset and culture. Again, questions, comments, sharing, thoughts, and ideas, go for it. So the first thing about the culture is you got to look at the predictive model versus an adaptive model. You have to say to yourself, I believe that this adaptive model makes sense. This adaptive model makes sense. And what we do in Agile, especially when we're in our iteration or our Scrum, is that we box in a segment of time, but our scope is always flexible outside that box. So that the predictive model, you are locked into your plan, and you might have to adjust your date and your cost. With Agile, you're locked into nothing, and during your work production period, you lock in on your date and your cost. That's called a time box in Agile. So your iteration might be 2 weeks, it might be 4 weeks, it might be 6 weeks. When you do that, you create a time box where your date and cost are fixed, but your scope is still flexible because you're going to come out of that time box and reevaluate what you did, what you should be doing, and then plan your next time box going forward with your scope being adjustable. So do you believe that will work? Then you have to look at your idea of your mindset. And you can see the manifesto if you want to go out there, Agile Manifesto. It's going to get into those principles. It's going to get into those values. But the very first thing on the left-hand side is Agile is a way of working. And that way of working is based on a mindset. That mindset shows itself forward in the values and the principles that you want to follow. From there, you have your behaviors and your actions. That's the practices. So if you do any study on cognitive behavioral therapy, it's a way of people understanding how their behaviors and actions are being driven. Your beliefs and values then drive your thoughts drive your feelings, and your thoughts and feelings drive your actions and behaviors. So what Agile is saying is that you really have to look at your values and your beliefs first in order to truly execute on the practices according to what the practices were meant to be. It's hard to do because we have the way we work has been so ingrained in following instructions, following a plan, and not pushing ourselves beyond the box of that plan. So what we want with the manifesto is people, function to see something, conversations, and then change. I accept that change is going to happen. The right is there, the right will always be there, but as a mindset in Agile, I want to work the left side. I believe that constant communication is better than something on a document in a project management tool. I believe that I would rather show people something over periods of time than write it all up before I execute. I believe that I must talk to my client, internal, external, whatever, consistently because they see things that I will never see. And then finally, this is it, change. You do Agile because you feel that change is the way the world is, that you can't hide from it. You can't black out period yourself and not get the repercussions of how change affected the current state. What Agile tries to do in its time box method is get you closer and closer to the future when you're boxing yourself in to actually do something. Then the second part of Agile is a process of learning. It's continuous learning because I want to learn, then ultimately I want it to become part of my flow. I want it to become a point that it's just who I am. This is the way I operate. And it's fluid, and not fluid in how you operate, but you are fluid. You get into that zone where you can just operate this way. And that takes a lot of learning. It takes a lot of practice. But this is the continuous improvement, continuous learning side of Agile. So that's part of that mindset, is that I want to continuously learn. From an Agile perspective, in a lot of cases, a really strong Agilist will say that the status quo is an invisible killer. They see the status quo as being something that's going to create much less value for them unless they're pushing forward to adjust and change that status quo, whether it's their skill set or the things going on in their company. So you have to believe that that's the case, and there's value in that. And you can see some of the mental models. And where you're getting at here is that how you view the world is going to affect how you actualize yourself in the world. How you view the world is going to affect how you actualize yourself into the world. It's going to affect your behaviors and actions. So Agile people really need to look deeply and see these mental models, because this is where Agile fails. Agile fails because they do the practices because they're told to do the practices. And then as things move, they fall away from those practices because they don't believe that those practices produce value, because they have not looked at the mental models and the principles and the values and said, yeah, this is something I want to do. And you get this idea of the growth mindset, which has been thrown around a lot. You're going to hear the growth mindset all the time, right? If you haven't, great. This is a good way to look at it for the first time. An Agile professional, part of the cultural foundation is that I believe all of us can continuously learn and grow. That the stages of a project is all about continuous growth and learning. And that continuous growth and learning cannot just be done by me, but it can be done by others around me. I'm not just X. I don't just do Y skill. John isn't just X. Sally isn't just X. There's more to it. There's more capability. There's more opportunity. And then centering around this idea that I may have to go backwards to go forward 2 more steps. meaning you want to fail. You want to learn from that failure and grow from it. Whereas in most fixed mindset, structural, plan-driven, hierarchical environments, there is no room for failure. A hierarchical environment would be the education system. The hierarchical environment would be your certification processes, all of which demand passing, demand that if you can't fail. It teaches us that there's no value in failure. And this is probably the biggest challenge for an Agile professional, how to get beyond that and be able to start seeing the value in failure. And this isn't just you and the team, it's the team's leader, it's the team manager, it's the team director. And part of the challenge with folks who want to look at Agile is they get frustrated about those above them. Well, this is not going to work because then the people above us aren't embracing it. And when I push back and say it has to start with you, Agile leadership is about starting with you being a leader, you taking responsibility for the work you do at the locus of that work, and having not feeling, but having the autonomy to make those decisions and accepting the ramifications of doing that. Then having the empowerment, because you have confidence, to be able to move on to something else if the organization isn't embracing the mindset you want to work with it. Now, I said a lot there, probably too much for this presentation, but I'll just lock in on evaluate yourself. Think about your organization. Where is the failure curve? Where is the test and try mentality? Where is the mentality around people can grow? Where is the training mentality around helping people grow through providing them the resources and the skills? Or is it, Bob's not worth us anymore, so we're going to bring in somebody new who has the skills we want? So ultimately, an Agile professional has to get away from the concept of learned helplessness. And simply put, learned helplessness has been how we have been able to just turn ourselves off, do what we're told to do, and operate because somebody else will make a decision for us. What we're seeing in knowledge working environments with more disruption and complexity and being complicated is that we need to get more than 50%, that 50% out of everybody who's working, or else this thing's going to fall apart. How do you push aside learned helplessness to grab the autonomy that's available and be able to make decisions for yourself without waiting for someone else? And of course, the critical success factor here for the Agile mindset is around psychological safety. And you might have read about it, you might have seen some things about it, you might have hearing it thrown around. This is what I want you to think about. I can give you the most psychologically, I can put you in the most psychologically safe environment I feel the world has ever created. Of course, that's through my filter. You have to accept the safety. If you don't accept the safety, there is no psychological safety. So psychological safety starts, just like Agile leadership starts with each individual, psychological safety starts with you. What I like to tell people is that the best way to start with psychological safety is to say, I have the skills and knowledge and capabilities to embrace that autonomy, make mistakes, learn and grow, regardless of the culture and the environment, because if that becomes a problem, I can go find another job quickly, rapidly. It's not going to affect my life because I have the confidence in the skills that I have. That's probably the most powerful way you can attack the working environment with an Agile mindset, is that base mindset of each individual person. It's hard though. It's hard because the environment of worker-employer is so unequal. But there's a lot more free agency now. There's a lot more empowerment now that there has been. I think it will continue to grow. I mean, the Great Resignation was an element of what I'm talking about, which is, I don't like it. I'll go somewhere else because I can. That's not being disloyal. That's being smart, because I'd rather someone leave a company because they don't like it than be there and contribute to less engagement, less happiness at work, less productivity, which is far worse for a company. Being actively disengaged is what they call it. Okay, so that was a lot of pontification around, the mentality, the process, the structure. So we get into some of the practices now. This is the behaviors and the actions, specifically the actions and activities. So there's 5 levels of planning in Agile. And I used to work at McDonald's, believe it or not. I was the employee of the month at McDonald's. I think it was October, November, 1987. I was a very good employee. One of the first things we learned is clean as we go. Basically, an Agile is plans as they go. Some of the plans are written in pencil. Some of the plans are written in pen. And we'll go through that, but there's 5 levels of planning. You got the vision, the roadmap, the release, the iteration, and the daily. The daily and the iteration can be written in pen. The iteration is your time box. That's your time box production of the work that you're going to work on during that time box. Everything else, release plan, roadmap, and vision, are going to be written in pencil. My vision. So if I'm going to do a spaghetti dinner, I first have to know what is my vision for it. Okay, is it a birthday party? Is it an anniversary party? Is the friend hangout? Is it just a nightly dinner? What's the vision for that project? The roadmap. Okay, how do I have to plan this out? If it's more higher level vision, my invitations, my decorations, my ordering, my prep, my release plan is, okay, if I'm going to work this out, because the thing about the vision, why you don't necessarily have to lock it down, it's a good point, a point well taken. And thank you for that, T. Smith. I appreciate it. The only thing you should ever lock down is your beliefs and values. That's the only, you are not what you do. You are who you are. That relates to, if you're an Agilist, you are who you are. Whatever you embrace as your way of working, is your way of being a person, your vision, not vision, your values and your beliefs should be locked. Everything else changes. Even vision can change. We don't want that to happen, but it can. Maybe I forgot someone's birthday, so midway through, the vision is a celebration. It's going to adjust your release plan. That's going to adjust your roadmap. Would I rather that not occur? Absolutely. But it can happen. But a great point. I'll tell you, the bigger issue is that most people miss the vision in the execution of the work. That's the worst problem. But you see how it goes strategic to tactical, getting down to that daily situation. I believe vision provided you with an anchor. It does. Absolutely does. So I get what you're saying. Just know that, you can go midway through a project and realize that your vision was off. So you might have to adjust your vision and adjust everything else underneath that. We missed something. But that anchor does help out a great deal, because we need that. And I'll tell you what, the bigger issue is that people miss it. That's a big issue too. Great conversation. Love to share. So we have a roadmap, a recap of our overview. Agile overview. I don't know why I'm just jumped into this recap. Let me see something for a second. Sorry about that. Oh yeah, it's a good slide. I'll go jump back over here. I don't know why it's called a recap, though, but it shouldn't call it a recap. So basically what this is going to start rolling in an animation, it's going to start showing you the different levels. So that bottom box, that very bottom box with happy people, that's your daily stand-up. Each day you're coming together and you're saying, this is what I worked on yesterday. This is what I'm going to work on today. And here's my impediments. Here's my challenges. Anybody can help me with this. Can anybody help me with that? I think we need to bring these resources in, tight, concise, and to the point each day. That level of accountability can be very empowering for all sides, but it's also a level of autonomy, because you're telling people what you're going to do. You're not sitting there waiting for someone to tell you what to do in the daily stand-up. This is what I'm doing. And then the one above that, those are your iterations. 2 to 4 week iterations. And then multiple iterations become releases. But remember, at the end of the iteration, you're going to showcase something. A release is you're going to deliver it out into the wild. But at the end of each iteration, you're going to show people stuff, a sliver of some level of functionality, so they can provide you feedback and input. And then you're going to have your overall delivery of different systems, your roadmap, and then finally, you're going to have your product vision. Your product vision might be, we are transitioning to a new type of toy, and this is the type of toy. So it's going to affect all avenues of our production. Here's a production release, roadmap, and ultimately we have to break that down into different releases to get those things moving. And then in that roadmap, you're going to prioritize which of these things are most important, where you want to start, and how you want to start. And those are your 5 levels of planning. So inside number 4 is your Scrum model. Ultimately, you're going to have a bunch of 3s as a product backlog. A bunch of 3s, a bunch of release ideas. Here's all the different things we should be doing. And then they're going to be broken down into user stories, tons and tons and tons of user stories based on the functions. And business analysts, Sonia, will be involved in creation of those user stories so that you can create a backlog. Then you're going to be looking at that backlog and deciding your sprint backlog. What are some of the things that you're going to be working on in upcoming sprints? You're going to pull those in. Then you're going to actually create your sprint based on a number of your user stories from that backlog. That sprint's going to be timed. We're going to do this in 4 weeks. We are going to then meet daily to review where we're at within that scope that we boxed into 4 weeks. We're going to finish. We're going to have an increment that someone can look at, touch, feel. They may go back and have new emergent requirements that we're going to add to either the sprint backlog or the product backlog. Then we're going to reevaluate for the next iteration plan based on where we see we're at. And before we conduct the next iteration, we're going to ask ourselves how we did. That's the retrospective. How did we perform as a group? What are things that we can improve upon? What skills do we need to bring into the team? What are we missing? Do we need more details from the product owner? We're feeling a little uncomfortable with how things are being valued. Our point system is off a little bit, and we'll get into the point system going here shortly. So that demo is where you're embracing feedback. You're embracing the customer being able to come back to you and say, this is what I think. It's not a presentation format. Here it is. Look how it works. What's your thoughts? What are you feeling? And you're going to start building out your emergent requirements from the feedback that you're getting. Embracing that feedback. And the retrospective, again, this is about continuous learning. It's not about, okay, what's our retrospective on what we're building? It's a retrospective about how the group, the team, the individuals of the team are operating. Are we autonomous? Are we kind of leaning too much on the Scrum Master? Are we leaning too much on our team manager? Are we negotiating okay? Are we compromising okay? Do we have the right skill sets in this team? How else can we improve to perform our function so that we can get great satisfaction out of being able to provide that function? So the retrospective is not about the delivery of that demo, as in what was inside the demo, or even where the overall release plan stands, or where the product roadmap stands, but it's about how you are operating as a team, how you're operating as an individual, how you can create more safety. Yeah, I don't feel I can't debate these issues. I feel like I'm having this shoved down my throat in a tight environment, that team environment. So there's two sides to an agile team or scrum team, we'll say, the customer side and the development side. The customer side is flanked by the product owner. The product owner becomes the proxy in some cases of maybe a product manager or an executive sponsor. But all of these folks need input and feedback into what it is that you're going to be building. And they usually do that in the form of, some people will do a detailed requirements document first, Tonya. So you might write requirements document, then cut that into user stories, and then cut that into cut that into use cases, then cut that into user stories, or they might go straight to user stories. But ultimately, your product owner should be interacting with these folks and bringing these folks in to communicate with the development unit as much as possible. Development unit focuses more on the work, not the role. So that's why in a lot of cases, the idea of business analysis and testing, maybe they aren't professions anymore. They're absorbed into being an agile practitioner. We moved away from that because there's a lot more hybrid agile than there is true form agile out there. But ultimately, you're part of this team, you bring a skill set, but you might have to pivot and adjust where necessary. You're all working together to get that iteration, that demo release of the iteration out, including for it to be tested appropriately, including for it to trace back to the requirements that you set the goal in the iteration plan, including actually even writing the documentation on that specific functionality. So these two teams kumbaya together. The product owner is a true Scrum position that's interfacing and working with the customer unit. And then the Scrum Master, see, it's the Scrum Master project manager. That's actually not quite right. The Scrum Master can be the project manager, but ultimately the Scrum Master is the orchestrator of the team. The Scrum Master is supporting their team in their ability to be agile. They're making that team, as I joke, agilicious. So the Scrum Master is more about, I am the person who, think about it as the dungeon, not the dungeon master. If you play Dungeons and Dragons, who's the one that the boss, and it's not like boss, they're not telling you what to do. They're just directing, they're guiding, they're orchestrating. I think it's the dungeon master. I can't remember. Anyways, and there is agile project management as well. So the Scrum Master can be held in both positions. Sometimes the business analyst wears the product owner hat. It's not the smartest way to do it. The product owner owns the valuing of your user stories, your emergent requirements, supporting on your iteration plan, supporting you on your release plan, and getting constant feedback back during that demo. The Scrum Master is teaching this team how to operate at a high level of autonomous efficiency working together. So now one of the challenges associated with all this is this idea of leading at the locus of your work. So part of the practice of Agile is being self-organized or self-directed. When I first learned about this, I saw it as chaos. I didn't get it. I was so pushed into the world of hierarchical management structures. I mean, I came up in the world in the restaurant business. You can't talk about anything that's more structured. And in the hotel business, structured, semi-skilled, unskilled workers, structured leadership. That's fine in that environment, but when you come to highly skilled knowledge workers, it falls apart because you lose the effectiveness, as we talked about with learned helplessness, of the total capabilities of that worker, that person. So self-directedness is a way by which you operate in the team, making decisions at the locus of your work. It has leadership implications, has individual communication implications, has psychological safety implications. You could do I do a whole presentation on that. You're estimating. The most important thing about estimating in Agile, it's not about time, it's about effort. Your story points are effort related, not time related. Now, ultimately, someone does transfer those things into time, But from a team perspective, what they want to learn is they want to learn that in this team, we have capabilities. So we have to look at those capabilities. We have to look at the scope of the work we're going to do in that is available to us. And then we have to decide. You may not have a really good coder on your team who needs support. So when you're coding, that team might have to have, it's a more complex situation. So it's going to be a longer time box. And remember, with time estimates, they're always over padded. I mean, when you're working 8 hours, you can debate me all day long, but you know you're not working a full 8 hours. If there's 4 minutes left in the basketball game, you know that basketball game's not going to end in 4 hours. If there's 4 minutes left in the basketball game, you know that basketball game is not going to last 4 minutes. Maybe working wise, 6 hours, bathroom, relax, eat, zone out. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually healthy. You could be more productive than trying to work 8 hours spastically. But ultimately, it's a level of effort. And then that's where you'll see this idea of story points. So now it's level of effort. The story points are based on Fibonacci sequence. So they're trying to do it from a non-adding hour related mindset. And you're ultimately looking at levels of effort. When you get into Fibonacci sequence and go into the hundreds, Agilists like to try to see if you can break that down, because you're saying if it takes that much level of effort to do that user story, then that user story needs to be chunkified more because you're missing things. There might be something in there that we need to know about that you're not telling us. So you want to keep your story points tight and in the tight range, and you're looking at level of effort. And planning poker is a game that you play in an Agile class around doing that better. We talked about the user story. You know, it's the 3 C's of a user story. You want to look at that. Mountain Goat Software, Mike Cohn does a great job on teaching people user stories. Sonia, this is the product of the business analyst role, product owner role. Product owner can help evaluate. Business analysts can help build these story points, usually building it out of a more detailed use case document. And so you want to make sure their size is right, that they're communicating an effective action, and what the value is that's trying to be communicated. And sorry, I forgot what the 3 C's are. If it pops up before we leave, I'll throw it at you. Someone out there might know what the 3 C's are for writing a user story. Complete, concise, and something else, I think. If you can share that, I greatly appreciate it. But 3x5 card. It's just, think of it as one of the functional requirements. Conversation. Thank you. Complete, collaborate, card, conversation, collaboration. We're getting there. Anyways, this is not a presentation on user stories, but I highly suggest, if you're going to be a business analyst in an Agile environment, card, conversation, confirmation. There you go. Excellent. Thank you so much, Amy. So I would definitely say, if you're a business analyst, you want to look at getting more deep into how you develop a user story. Recap and value. So we have the overview, customer team, the development team. Customer team is around the vision and the roadmap. Both teams are working together, writing the stories. The development team sizes the stories. Now we're prioritizing most of the development team, all of the customer team. And now you're looking at what your baseline ability is to produce within those time boxes. So how many user stories? Velocity is basically how many user stories can that team produce in a given time box. And then you have your release plan based on what your velocity looks like. This is where the project management comes in. Understanding story points, measuring story point function, tying it back to what your baselines are, so you can build a release plan out, always knowing it's about effort, not time. Then you have your value attributes. Ultimately, Agile gives you much greater visibility during the course of the project because of your demo every 4 or 6 weeks of your iteration. If you're getting beyond 6 weeks for an iteration time box or a sprint, then you're losing out on that visibility element. Adaptability, when you run an Agile project, it's going to take the same amount of time that you potentially initially planned for the waterfall project. It might shorten because of the amount of work that is done to get to release. But in most cases, it doesn't initially because of the time needed to define value, reevaluate, develop emergent requirements. Since you're getting some functionality out of a 4-week time box, there's increased business value. Some of those things can be used elsewhere. And then certainly the whole thing about Agile is reducing your risk because you're getting closer and closer to the future before you box yourself into doing something. And ultimately the risks. So I will tell you can read the slides. The number one risk in Agile is assuming that everybody has the belief and the mindset. Ultimately, you want to hire and look for someone who could be an Agile person or shows that they have the belief to work in this Agile way. Because all humanity, we're not perfect, we're broken, there's going to be broken elements in what we do. But if you don't have that belief, it's going to fall apart very quickly. Next is the skills to self-organize. And what I mean by that is that have you trained your teams on how to deal with conflict? Have you trained your teams on how to deal with negotiation? Because in that team autonomous environment, there will be negotiation points, there will be compromise points, there will be conflict points that were usually managed by the manager, but now it needs to be done by the team. So we don't give some of those team level leadership skills or power skills to a self-organized environment, and then things fall apart. Or the Scrum Master doesn't necessarily understand self-organization enough to catch when it's becoming more leader-led. Lack of communication, lack of communication, lack of communication. Very, very, very bad in an Agile environment. The product owner not having authority, de facto product owner in name only, because there goes all your valuing out the door. Or you're not, or that person's inability to push back and tell the customer unit what you guys are seeing as value, what the development unit is seeing as value. I'll leave that slide up because you can kind of look at it. High level introduction to Agile. If you do Agile for HR, there's an entire manifesto tied to it, very similar to the manifesto, tied to Agile and software development. There's core values, and there are lots of practices. Agile and marketing. It goes back to the values, the manifesto, the values, the principles, and then you have lots of different practices that you can execute to run Agile, to run marketing in the Agile way. There's Agile for finance. Overall, there's Agile for business operation, day-to-day work operation. And the person who drove the book on that, his name is Stephen Denning. And some of you might know the book, it's Radical Management. But any questions, comments, thoughts? Thank you for the support, T. Smith. Thank you for support, Amy, Chris, for throwing in some of those ideas and helping me with the 3 C's. Any questions? I see a hand clap. I appreciate that. If you want to email me at, I'm going to do 2 things here, davidm@softed.com. You can do so. We have an introduction to Agile class. Mona, you have your hand raised. You can, I can't give you the mic, but you can type in your question. We have an Agile funds class you can look at. And I can give you 20% off. And then finally, I do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. Let me see here. I can give you my LinkedIn address. And if there's no other questions, after I give you a LinkedIn address, I'll let you fly. Let's see now. All right, I got 3 chats. Let me see. There's my LinkedIn. Really like the psychological safety side. Yeah, I got some recorded web seminars on that, Jonathan. If you go to the SoftEd website, go in the Learning Hub and type in psychological safety, you can see some of the presentations there. There's a lot more to share in that. Yeah, Amy, this is a very rough level of the Agile Fundamentals class. If you're more in the software project and SDL software development lifecycle project, our Agile Fundamentals goes much more deeper, and there's lots of hands-on practices. It's at least 45% hands-on workshop. Also, you have we have the business agility fundamentals class that's coming out that's more agile related to the business side of things. And then we have the Agile for leading with agility class that's coming out as well. But yeah, this is just, some of those slides came from our class, but certainly there's a lot more to class than what I just did. Thank you, Amy, for the question. Any other comments, thoughts? All right, you'll get the recording, you get the slides here in the next couple of days. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day. Really appreciate you.